are here to participate in our full-day conference. My name is Jamie Nuko. I am an MBA student at GW, as well as an aspiring entrepreneur. My goal is to combine my psychology and biology background with a business degree to open an animal care and training center. In the meantime, I'm also a personal trainer, these days mostly in the form of Zoom, and I'm in the midst of working on a business plan for a gym that can function through a pandemic, despite the social distancing that will continue for the foreseeable future. I am honored to be moderating the plenary session for the 2020 GW Global Entrepreneurship Conference. I hope you all are doing well and staying safe. At George Washington University, we are fortunate to have numerous and comprehensive entrepreneurship-related programs that provide a wide variety of opportunities to foster collaboration and innovation. It is from these that we can envision one major event, an annual GW Entrepreneurship Week. As mentioned in the earlier session this morning, this year the conference theme is resiliency in entrepreneurship. We are celebrating resiliency in a strategic moment in time, during and post-coronavirus, and in just a few months since school reopenings. We have the unbelievable opportunity to share and learn how we can become more resilient. This is our second plenary session of the day. In the first, we focused on creativity and innovation in the evolution of the individual, society, business, and industry. Now we shift the focus to the future of business. Every business, organization, and nonprofit has been forced to evolve to stay afloat during the pandemic. Both established businesses and startups have scrambled, whether it be to fill the intense demand or to compensate for demand that has dropped sharply. The challenge has also been accompanied by increased pressure on existing logistics companies and networks. As companies are adapting to a new world where e-commerce, app-based shopping, and home delivery are paramount, this panel explores the opportunity and challenges that now exist within the realm of digital commerce, such as subscription services and subscription delivery. Sustainable products and sustainable business practices are the new norm, and businesses have no choice but to adapt if they want to survive. This track addresses questions such as, what is the future of business now and post-COVID-19? How can businesses build sustainability into an already tight budget? How does a commitment to sustainability and environmental stewardship impact innovation? What does the future entail for things like health, wellness, and education in an increasingly digital world? And do large and small businesses have different responsibilities? First, let me thank Dr. Ayman El-Tarabishi, our conference chair, without whom this conference would not have been possible. Award-winning author and teacher, Dr. El-Tarabishi is not only the president and CEO of the International Council for Small Business, he is also the deputy chair of the Department of Management for the George Washington University School of Business. He is not only passionate about social entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity, but also aims to pass that passion on to his students so that they may develop and manifest it in their own way. And now, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. The Honorable Dr. Winslow Sargent is the Senior Advisor for Globalization and Head of Capital Markets for Genesis. In this role, Dr. Sargent syndicates opportunities with unaffiliated third-party capital partners, both domestically and internationally, facilitating optimized valuations and deal structures. In 1997, Dr. Sargent co-founded AA Netcom, a computer circuit design company, which was acquired by PMC Sierra only 3 years later for $900 million. As an investor, he has participated in numerous private equity and venture capital funds. In addition to his business and investing experience, Dr. Sargent is a Kauffman Fellow, a member of the Presidential Leadership Group at Stevens Institute of Technology, a trustee for several notable foundations, and a founding board member of First Women's Bank. Dr. Sargent was appointed by President Obama as Chief Counsel for Advocacy in 2010 and unanimously confirmed by the US Senate in 2011. The Chief Counsel of Advocacy represents the independent voice of small businesses before the White House, US Congress, and the federal courts. Dr. Sargent is the incoming chair of the International Council for Small Business and has been a strong advocate in helping countries worldwide develop powerful small business infrastructure, as well as mentoring businesses directly to accelerate their growth. Dr. Ash Rofail is the general partner of Opener Venture Capital and chairman of a publicly traded company named Santion Group, Inc. and a national recognized business and technology leader. He has published 6 books, holds several artificial intelligence patents, is an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins University, and a frequent speaker at conferences and international panels. In 2015, Dr. Rofail received the Distinguished Award of Most Influential Executive in Washington, D.C. by Smart CEO magazine across all industries and companies with headquarters in Washington, D.C. metro area. And last but not least, Dr. Ahmed Osman is chair of the International Council for Small Business and the official host of the Global Entrepreneurship Week in Egypt. He is president and CEO of his own company, Crone Inc. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering with honors and a master's degree in engineering and management from the University of Birmingham in the UK. He's also a certified project management professional from the Project Management Institute here in the US. Mr. Osman works with several UN agencies and development partners on SME and entrepreneurship development projects in Egypt, and has been instrumental in the launch of the Egypt Entrepreneurship Summit. We are very excited we have them here to participate in our conference today. Okay, so I guess I will go ahead and start asking you questions. I have a lot, we'll see how many we can get through. I'd like to address this question to any and all of you. What has been most surprising to you in terms of the initiatives that you've seen small businesses or entrepreneurs take during this time of global crisis?
So Jamie, why don't we start with Mr. Osman to kick us off here? So yes, sure. you get to pick on whoever you like. So let's do it that way.
So yes, Mr. Osman, why don't you start us off? You're put on the spot. I think you're muted, just so you know. I don't think we can hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got cut off as the question was going. I had a bad connection. So maybe if you can repeat the question again, yes, please.
Of course. What has been most surprising to you in terms of the initiatives that you've seen small businesses or entrepreneurs take during this time of global crisis? Oh, did we lose you again?
Yeah, we might have lost him, but he might join us here. So if that's the case, we might want to go with Dr. Winslow Sargent until he comes back. Dr. Winslow Sargent, go ahead.
Well, Jamie, it's a pleasure to be here, and Dr. Terabishi, thanks for putting on such an outstanding conference. It's a joy to be on a panel with such distinguished speakers. With regard to what I've seen, how small businesses have adapted or tried to adapt to something that's unprecedented, it's just the nature of small businesses and entrepreneurs, right? As soon as COVID hit, we saw the shutdown, the lockdown, and what that meant, that was a huge disruption to what we call the supply chain. Things that were global in nature and just in time had changed. And so what small businesses had to do, they had to look at their resources. They had to find other methods and other sources for production, for talent, to address the needs that they have. And so we're pleased to see that small businesses, although they're the frontline workers of COVID-19, in terms of health, for example, they looked at some of the tools they have to make masks, to make agents, to make a whole bunch of things that we needed to address, the health effects of what COVID-19 caused us as a society, as a world. In terms of restaurants were shuttered, and so there had to be a new means to get access to the consumer. And so that's why this panel is so needed, because when we talk about digitization and automation, that's what small businesses have had to wrestle with and to rely on technology. And so that's what I've seen, the use of technology broadly to have a digital presence to make sure that the businesses, although disrupted by COVID-19, were still able to function.
So how do you think we can kind of make good use of that, of the learnings throughout the lockdown, and bring them into our future business models?
Well, in terms of best practices, I think that it's very, very important that that we capitalize on the fact, one, we're not going back to a pre-COVID-19 world where you know, the restaurants were going to be packed, not for quite some time. And so therefore, some of the best practices in terms of speed, knowing what the customer needs, making sure that if you're a service provider, if you're a restaurant, make sure that your menu or your offerings are up online, they're clearly accessible, you know, that they're not hidden on a web page someplace. Make sure that you're able to respond in a timely manner to your customer from a delivery. What are some of the tools, since we're not as mobile as we used to be? How do we get access? How do we bridge the gap from consumer to business, whether it's B2B or B2C? How to make use of the fact that many of us are at home now, so we know exactly where people are. And so it's not a question mark anymore because many of us are shuttered in place. And so therefore, you know where the customer is, you know where the needs are, how to make sure that you bridge that gap, close and to provide the offerings for those consumers.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. We're not going back to a post-COVID world. So everybody has to adapt to survive. Do we have you back, Mr. Osman?
Yes, I'm back. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So you've been involved with entrepreneurship development projects in Egypt. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in the challenges and opportunities facing entrepreneurs in the US and in a developing country such as Egypt?
Yes, thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you to Ayman Tarabishi, of course, because I know how he puts in a lot of effort to organize GW Entrepreneurship Week, and it's great to see it online. I'm also very happy to be with two dear colleagues, Winslow and Ash. So basically, you know, when we look at the entrepreneurs or small business owners in Egypt or in the US, I think they all face the same type of challenges. So if we just mention a few of them, it's basically how they market themselves, how do they develop their business, how they access to finance issue is always a big thing. But obviously with the COVID, I don't want to say the post or pre or we're in the COVID, I don't know where we are, but looking at what happened in March and this global standstill we all went through, and it was just a shock to everyone, you know, not only business owners, it was shock to students, children, grown-ups, everyone was just shocked, okay? And something which was a shock was some businesses went from generating sustainable revenue to zero revenue. And this has never happened before. Even in war times, people used to trade and sell, okay? So what we went through was something which no one would have imagined would happen, and no one was ready for it, whether big, small. We see airline companies, we see tour operators, tourism companies, hotels, everyone was just shocked, okay? So in terms of initiatives globally look the same, they sound the same, but will they be sustainable? I don't know. So we saw in the US, the US government did very well in this giving out cash to small businesses to save them from collapsing. They helped them survive. They helped them pay their salaries, their rents, etc. We saw this all around Europe. We saw this in some developing countries as well. However, when we look at this winter, for example, we're going supposedly through a second wave of this pandemic. Do countries have such resources to pay this out again? I doubt it, okay? Are countries going to be as strict in lockdown measures as they were back in March? I doubt it, okay? So looking at the world now in terms of this pandemic, I think if we go through a second wave, we're going to take it in a let's say a less serious manner, a more lenient manner, because we cannot afford to close down economies as we did back in March. We cannot afford to close down schools and universities, and we've seen Germany and France closing down the country, but not closing down education, for example. So I think small business owners have been suffering all around the world because of what has happened during COVID. Those who have survived will have learned a big lesson. Those who haven't, I think young or let's say entrepreneurs who failed will try and look at a new business model, look at a new way to present themselves, their products, their services. But the whole pandemic thing we went through was a big, big shock to the global economy as a whole and to small business owners and entrepreneurs in particular. So I think going forward, everyone will be very, very cautious on how they handle themselves in terms of cash, how they handle themselves in terms of delivery model of business, etc.
Yeah, I have a biased interest in that question. I'm half Lebanese, and I know Lebanon is struggling as a non-export country. With the pound being incredibly inflated, how can they, how can small businesses and entrepreneurs really keep moving when everything is halted?
I think Lebanon. I think if I can just jump in here, in Lebanon is in a very tricky situation because it's not only the pandemic, there is also political and social unrest, if I may say. So I think what's really good about the Lebanese nation in general is they're very entrepreneurial, okay? So they've been through civil wars, they've been through wars, and they still made it through and made it through in a very, very good spirit. So I'm sure that coming through this pandemic and the social and political unrest, there will be something smart and new coming out of Lebanon in the way they handle themselves and the way they have their future in terms of business.
Good point. That spirit definitely is not lacking among the Lebanese. So one more question about this, and then we can move on. Has the plunge into digital business created new opportunities for entrepreneurs in countries like Egypt to become more integrated into the global entrepreneurship ecosystem, or is there a digital divide that might disadvantage them in this current context?
I think what we've been through in Egypt in terms of digitization has been a revolution. So whatever this country has planned for the next 5 to 10 years happened in 3 to 6 months, okay? Everything went into fast forward mode very, very quickly. Our public schools, we have 27 million students a year doing education. They have all been switched very, very quickly into online learning, okay? So I think what has happened was for us, I believe in what the government does, but we actually applaud what has happened because of the quick transformation. Egypt was the only country in the Middle East to run physical exams in June and July for high school, okay? All other countries around us in the region canceled exams. The UK did, the US and some states did, but we had 3 million students going through their physical exams for what we call Thanawi Amma or high school. So we did it, okay? In terms of digitization of business, we've seen small businesses and large businesses become digital. We always had great traffic issues in Cairo. It's always chaos. Cairo is a city of 20 million people, and it's very, very dense. However, we've seen companies switch and transform their operations to online, to do digital teamwork, to deliver their goods and services digitally. Egypt has, let's say, in terms of internet infrastructure, has invested heavily in the last few months in maintaining and upgrading the digital infrastructure. And I think this country, despite we have our economic, etc., but we are the only country in the Middle East to witness growth coming out of 2020. It was supposed to be 6%, now it's down to 2.5. So we're the only country in the Middle East to have actually a positive growth in GDP, okay? So in terms of how we handled ourselves with the pandemic, it happened, the government did, let's say, their contingency plan, it worked well.
I think you froze.
He froze. But let me ask this question to Ash, because Ash, you are currently in Egypt as well. You just got back, from my understanding. So let's ask the same question again for you. What do you think? Not just Egypt, but most countries that, and Mr. Osman made a remarkable statement saying the 10-year plan for a digital country has been compacted within 3 months and executed. So ideated, designed, developed, executed within 3 months. How do you see this with your role in your company and your leadership? How do you see this balancing out?
Yeah, so I've experienced this actually firsthand just in the last 48 hours, to be honest. We have a fund here in Egypt, and I met with 2 companies. They're typically brick and mortar companies. They're, in the healthcare industry, and they were, their business had come into almost, total, halt when the pandemic hit. And the topic today is really around resiliency. This is where you start testing how is a business resilient. How do you, as even a brick and mortar business, continue when things are shut down, people are locked in. And I was surprised to see how digitization of certain aspects of their business had not only allowed them to sustain their business, where otherwise it was at risk of within 2 months to completely shut down, but not only sustain them, but created a new business opportunity for them through adoption of technology. They're in the radiology scanning type business, so it's a a human to human contact. You have to go to a physical place to do it. So when things are shut down, no one comes to you. So in a typical business, that would really be the end of it. But with those companies that really have staying power and they want to embrace technology, want to look for ways to digitize, they were able to spin aside a new line of business that connects, idle doctors with patients at home. And that became such a huge revenue stream to the point where within 4 months, they spun off another entity that purely got into the telemedicine, which was not really their field at all. But that's really where, I am seeing a firsthand example of companies or corporations not necessarily pivoting, but finding opportunities to sustain their existing business while in a way, stumbling upon a huge opportunity to also take advantage of the infrastructure and digitization and the current situation where everyone is really, in our portfolio companies, everyone is really looking at, do we have resiliency, staying power? Do I wait? Do I double down? Or do I pivot? So that's really kind of, on a global scale where we have companies around the world, is everyone is going through the same sort of thought process.
And let me jump in here, and I would add, and that's a very good topic that Ash has pointed out, just the resiliency, especially within healthcare, because I'm an investor in a number of companies and some of these companies, they're in the elective surgery marketplace, and for COVID-19, in many countries, the elective surgery marketplace was actually shut down. Now, unless you were the focus entirely on COVID-19, meant those who had other who needed to have treatment for other non-COVID medical problems. Those businesses in those lines were actually, they couldn't do anything, but there was a pivot in terms of telehealth and telemedicine, and so that's the resiliency in terms of healthcare, in terms of these businesses, that when one aspect was shut, and then one had to be creative in terms of, okay, let's make use of some of the talent, let's make use of some of the resources, but also let's make use of technology and how to connect the patient with the doctor, the customer with the business. And so that's what we've seen in terms of small businesses and in light of COVID-19.
I want to come back to sustainability in just a moment, but Dr. Sargent, you're a serial entrepreneur of sorts. You're involved in academia, you're a successful entrepreneur, and you've also transitioned into politics. How can government support SMEs right now in this current moment in time?
Well, I think that government plays an important role with SMEs. A couple of years ago, I remember having a conversation with Prince Constantine. He's a prince from the Netherlands, and we discussed what role do governments have with startups and with small businesses, and at the time, we many of us looked at it from a different point of view in terms of what role, or should government have any role at all. But what we've seen in light of COVID-19, that the government became the lender of last resort, that when banks weren't lending and when things shuttered, it was the government who played a constructive role. And so this public-private partnership role that government plays is so important. And the government should play a role, because when you think of taxes that are paid come from small businesses, which goes to the government. And in terms of the role, what government can play is helping businesses transform themselves into digitization and automation. We really need to make sure that the regulations and rules with regard to commerce, e-commerce especially, aren't burdensome. We need to also make sure that broadband it has to be much more accessible. We know that in the fourth industrial revolution, we're going towards digitization and automation. That means we're online. And so what government can do, help in terms of not just access to capital and loans, but make sure that the infrastructure is available so that small businesses can have an online presence, and that they can transact commerce. Government also needs to be clear, make sure their rules are clear, predictable, and transparent because small businesses, it's hard for them to keep up with all the rules and regulations that are coming out due to COVID-19. And so there needs to be some sensitivity in terms of small businesses. They have their head down, they're trying to make ends meet. And so the rules, some of the rules and regulation may have to be considered in terms of how they impact small business. In terms of tax deductions, more small businesses are actually being run out of their home office. And so there needs to be some leeway in terms of those businesses that are no longer running out of an office park or in an office tower. What does that mean for tax treatment for those businesses that are actually running out of their home? And so there should be some consideration of that as well. But I think that government can be a constructive partner. And then what government can do from a procurement point of view, governments tend to spend a lot of money with large businesses. I think we need to really look at the fact that government should be a partner in also spending with small businesses, because small businesses and entrepreneurs can also meet the government needs as well. And so those are some of the constructive ways that government can play in supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Thank you. I agree. So next question, Dr. Rafael, going back to sustainability. Throughout your career, you've been very successful in building sustainable ventures without raising capital or borrowing money in order to build those sustainable ventures. So I have kind of a multi-part question for you. The first of which is, what factors do you consider when making a decision to financially invest in a startup?
What factors? I mean, there are a lot of factors, and I think if you talk to every VC, they'll probably list the same common things that every VC looks for. It starts by we're looking for the the team and the idea. For me, I look at the timing first, then the team, then the technology. So there's kind of the 3 T's. And I add another letter to them, which is distribution. So if a startup comes in and they are the right team, and mostly my definition of a right team is a team that have either deep technical experience or deep domain experience, but it's actually something that is tangible, not just someone who's familiar or comfortable, or they have to be deep experts in one or the other. That's what make the diversity of the team. You can't have a team that are all technologists. Someone has to be able to know how to sell. So you need a team that has the ability to actually build a distribution channel, which again goes back to part of it is the organic growth and being able to build companies without necessarily capital. The timing, and a lot of startups, they have a great idea and they think that, well, the timing will come, sure, but if that runway is too long, you're really looking at a ton of capital until the market catches up with you, because you're not an Apple or Microsoft or a Google can actually do that. You're a startup, so you have to consider the timing, if it's too late or way too early, and the technology. So if you don't have a resilient technology that is a differentiator and just another Me Too, then it's we find a lot of VCs invest in tech companies, but they're not of tech background. So, I think that's usually is an issue when you're coming evaluating. We tend to be a very tech heavy VC investor. And distribution, if you don't have distribution, a strong, um, a proven distribution model, distribution channel, or go-to-market strategy, and that is usually a concern, especially if your idea of distribution is we're just going to go and do sales, marketing and digital marketing. That costs a lot of money. So you can tell I'm kind of pretty sensitive to a lot of the startups that are not themselves financially prudent or financially sensitive. They just feel that if you just give me a bag of money, I'm sure I will create a product in the market. And usually that's really not the case. The most startups fail because there's no need or want for their product. So money is not really the primary goal, primary issue. But that's the three T's, and the distribution is really would be how we or I personally make investment decisions.
And I think you kind of touched on this with your answer to that question, but what are key considerations or requirements for sustainability?
So I've been in the industry, for maybe over 30 years. I was lucky enough to work with great companies early on in my career, and even as I moved up, be part of the executive team. The discussion around raising capital or venture capital was not really a discussion that was had around the table as much as I see it now. It was discussion about growth, about customer acquisition, about great customer service and delivery, about investing in technology that people want and how do we take it to them. We did not have back then a lot of these companies that I started with, very small, but they became very big. We didn't have the current media channels and influentials and all that. It was purely organic, knocking on doors, putting products in front of customers, getting feedback, turning that feedback around very quickly, providing great support. So that's really how I was influenced. Most of the companies I worked for really, rarely any of them raised any capital, or if they have, it was much further down the road. And maybe that's what I'm mostly influenced by, is that you can, if you have a good product that the market want, and you have a good distribution channel and a network effect to help you spread that, I think you will not necessarily be so dependent and urgent to get capital, which really contributes to your resiliency. Because once, if you have that built-in resiliency and sustainability within your business, then you're not totally dependent on capital availability. You can survive and grow. And seen a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of examples in the industry that people don't talk about. They always talk about the companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and we see that around us, but it doesn't seem to phase us anymore. Quibi raises $1.3 billion, and within a matter of weeks they're flunked. Someone will probably make a movie about them that makes more than the money they raised. So so again, we tend to miss the importance of what are the components of building resiliency, and tend to think that capital is what gives us resiliency rather than relevancy to a product and the market, that whether it needs a product or not.
Thank you. Mr. Osman, do you really believe in government intervention? Is closing down all businesses a practical solution?
I normally don't believe in government intervention. I think Winslow's going to smile about this now, but given the circumstances of the pandemic,
I am laughing.
of the pandemic, I think governments have a role to play. However, they just need to intervene with the necessary intervention, and not think they own the companies or the private sector in a way because they've intervened and saved companies. But I want to really, add on to what Ash has mentioned, because what we've been seeing in the last 5 to 10 years, if I may say, there's this hype around entrepreneurship globally, okay? And everyone wants to wake up and become an entrepreneur, and people are going to do MBAs on entrepreneurship and the degree programs, and they think this will basically give them the skills to become the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates of the future, okay? This is not how companies survive and work, and this is not how the economy works, and this is not what the market wants, okay? The market wants technically competent people who can build, that companies can be built upon, okay? It's not about me having a smart idea and then bringing in a programmer who 6 months down the line will leave me because he's getting $20,000 more somewhere else, okay? But I have to have the skills myself, me and my team, my founding team, to basically build a good product. And this product grows into other products and other services, etc., and becomes acquirable or becomes economically attractive to other people. But what we're seeing now is people who are excellent, have excellent presentation skills. They do the best TED Talks as they may in the world, and they come on stage, say their stuff, and when you look at the numbers, they don't make sense. But you see people investing in these companies, okay? And I don't see the future. These companies will never survive in the future. These investors will never put in money as they have been putting in the last 5 to 10 years. I want to also move on to education, because I think with what we're seeing with online education and the way we've been learning over the last 50 to 100 years, I don't see the future going towards 4-year programs anymore or 2-year MBAs. I think we're going to more micro programs, and I've been reading very recently articles about Google asking people to do their 6-month training programs, which they will think will be equivalent to 4-year programs. So I think this pandemic is going to shock a lot of the status quo of education. I think the buzz and hype around entrepreneurship also will be this is a wake-up call. Not everyone with a good idea will become investable, because basically it's not about the idea, it's about this idea having the commercial channels and being sold to different customers in certain countries or all around the world. So I think looking forward, we all have to really have a purpose, okay? And this purpose in terms of business, in terms of education, we have to really measure where we're going and why we're going there, because we've been going, Winslow, it's all because of President Obama. Since 2008, he gave everyone this fancy headline, let's all become entrepreneurs. And everyone's been dreaming of being an entrepreneur. So he's played a very smart political game. He attracted young people to it. And I think he was smart enough to tell young people, you will have to create your own jobs. Governments won't create these jobs. And I think this was what he was trying to reach. But this fairy tale has gone on too long, now. And because of the good intentions he had back in 2008, we're all suffering today.
Well, I think it's definitely things are going to be different moving forward. And we have this idea that we have all of the opportunities in the world. And now, we have to accept the fact that that's not necessarily the case. And of course, it wasn't the case to begin with, but, it was the ideal version of it.
Jamie, I would like to ask Dr. Winslow to comment on Mr. Osman's statement.
Well, yes, and gladly. I think that with regard to education, I think that there are many schools of thought. I do agree that we're seeing a change in terms of the structure of education, but I still think we're still going to need the traditional education of higher learning, because we're going to have to deal with either we're going to look at an evolution, which I think you can get through a 6-month program and working in coding, or the true revolution comes through hard science, hard research. The challenge that we have to address is that not every company is a software digital company. There's some that require a lot of hard science in chemistry, in biology, and in the physical sciences, which take a lot of years to do. And so we need to have people who are willing to commit time to study those fields. Of course, but there are those that, of course, that can go to a trade school or a vocational program and can learn how to code in 6 months. And so that's the thing, that's the dilemma that we face, is that there are those who still will, and so that's the dilemma that we face. But also with entrepreneurship, I think it's good that we've moved away from the question of nature versus nurture. Many years ago, we had the question of, are you born an entrepreneur, or can you be made one? And there's some who are on all sides of the issue. Well, I always believe that you don't know if someone can be a good entrepreneur unless they have the opportunity. And there are those that will be great. There are those, of course, we can see that there are those who are born and they have that quality of skill. But with training, with education, with access to capital, with access to opportunity, you can become very good. I always like to say that I'll never be able to beat Usain Bolt in 100 meters. But with good practice, with the proper practice and the right coach and the right training, I can decrease my 100 time to be decent, not to be world class, but to be decent. And there are many of those who we don't know who can become decent and who can be good. It's just that they need to get the opportunity.
I want to take a question from the chat here asking about the impact of the current economic situation and economic contradictions on the future of work for youth, which I think ties into education as well.
I think this is the worst time for anyone to be a young person. Okay, so if you're graduating this year from university or from school, you're in a bad market, because it's a fact of life. Okay, this pandemic has hit the economies of the whole world in a very bad way. Okay, but I think there is an opportunity for young people to basically, use this pandemic to their own good, start something, do a sort of, even if it's a micro business, okay, a small business, if I may say. It doesn't have to be this high-tech venture, okay? But I see that employment opportunities will be very, very limited for people coming out of school this year, next year, and 2 to 3 years down the line. Lots of people already losing jobs. The future of work supposedly should become more digital, should become more automated, robotics, etc. So there will be less job opportunities for people all around, in all age groups, not only young people. But I think when you look also at education, okay, and this is key now, are we going to be spending that much money in education in the future? Do we have to pay the $50,000 to $100,000 a year at universities? I'm not sure. I don't know. Will people have the money to pay it, first of all? And secondly, will the model of education maybe cost less? Okay, I see lots of people now. Ayman has led a very good movement at ICSB through doing our certificates programs online, and we're seeing the reach Ayman has been able to do all around the world, and we're charging less for these certificates than used to happen, but they're creating better impact, if I may say. So I think the business model of education definitely will change. Ash, for example, I know has years of experience in AI. Do you need a 4-year degree program in artificial intelligence, Ash, or can you do it in less? What do you think?
Well, it kind of depends. I'm always surprised to see suddenly most of the startups coming to us, they have some sort of an AI element. So I always wonder, how was that acquired? Whether that is, through sort of, blood, sweat, and tears, like the path I took, or was it a micro degree? I can't really judge, to be honest. It's all going to be the proof in the product and whether it's true or not. But for sure, I think the AI is an example. But if you take entrepreneurship as a whole, it certainly does need a little bit more definition and structure. It's like saying I'm an artist, so who actually define whether you are an artist or not. I can just draw a line and say that's art, and nobody would argue with me. So it's the same thing with entrepreneurs. I think we get, just taking a little bit of what Dr. Osman said and what Dr. Sarden also said, they're both correct, where yes, on one side, you need opportunities to validate that, but sort of the excessive use of entrepreneur without some sort of a guidelines or understanding what the journey looks like, It's probably maybe the happy medium. This is where, you know, academia can step in and really create some specific definitions rather than, you know, now you can be unemployed and say I'm an entrepreneur, which is fine, but there are outcomes and results out of really being an entrepreneur, whether you're, you know, an entrepreneur or serial entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur. So there's certain conditions, I guess, and prerequisites maybe, and postrequisites as well, in terms of defining what truly that journey looks like and what kind of skills you need. And I think it's a little bit maybe perhaps loose right now, and because it's positive, so you don't want to kind of put a lid on that. It's such a positive thing, an entrepreneur, but it needs some guidance and direction, I believe.
We have a question from the Q&A. Sorry,
Yeah, I was just going to weigh in that I believe the glass is half full in terms of the times that we're in. I think these are extraordinary times, and I think that for those who are much younger than I think you should be excited. The fact that, because one, we know that talent is not localized to any gender, any region, any culture, any race, and so there is a huge effort to find the best talent, and also all of the incumbent companies, they're worried about disruption, they're worried about being eclipsed, and so there's a search for the best and the brightest all over the globe. So whether or not you're in a developed or a developing country, north, south, it doesn't really matter as much, as long as you have the talent, as long as you have the opportunity, as long as you have the idea. And then also for those who are in bigger countries, now they're going to have much more say because of the lockdown. Now we've seen a disruption in supply chains. And so things that were normally shipped, say from China or from other places, now you have to build within your borders, healthcare systems, educational systems. And so that creates a huge opportunity for those who want to be creative, because now there's a need that's local. So we've seen the disruption in globalization and its regionalization. And for those who are creative, I think this is an opportunity. And last but not least, I think we should always focus on the SDG goals, the 17 goals. Those are still relevant. So if you can come up with an idea to address any one of those goals, those are global goals. That if you can help to reduce poverty, help to reduce healthcare disparities, help to work on sustainability, those are huge, huge needs. And so wherever you are and access to education online or wherever, that if you can help to solve some of those problems, then that's a big market.
Yeah, thank you. With the Q&A here, here's a question. Development donors and implementing partners have focused for some time now on entrepreneurship training, and often specifically for economically or socially disadvantaged individuals. Given that the number of new businesses that succeed is so limited, and recognizing that participants in these programs have few resources themselves, do you feel that such training is beneficial and a good use of development dollars? If yes, what components or elements of such training are the most essential?
I think this is an excellent question because, you know, I think there's a lot of development and donor money being invested in training in general for entrepreneurship. And we all know that 8 out of 10 startups or small businesses which start fail. Okay, so this money is being wasted, if I may say, because only 20%, 2 out of 10, make use of this and have a sustainable business. Or let's say in some countries, it's something which creates what we call necessity entrepreneurship. It gets people out of poverty sometimes, which is good. Okay, but in other cases, we have, for example, in my country here in Egypt, lots of programs supporting women entrepreneurs, which is also great. But are we seeing these companies grow and scale? I have my doubts. Okay, so they create the correct environment, but to start a company or to start a venture is not only a training, it's lots of things. It's what you have, what technical knowledge you may have before, what the market requires, what the market opportunities are around you as a business to penetrate and grow. And if there's a regional thing in terms of, let's say in Egypt, you can export to Africa, etc. So I think we need to have a more macro overview rather than a micro, because some of these donor interventions come in and say, okay, I'm going to train people in this state, for example, and then they leave, and the people who have been trained have no opportunities within their state. So I think there needs to be a macro integrated approach to make better use of this donor money, if in a way. In some areas, donor money comes in to be sent back to the countries where the donations come from originally. Okay, so without mentioning countries and names, some funds or foreign donors come to Egypt and say, I'm going to spend $100 million, and 80 million or $90 million go back to the country of origin through consultancy contracts, buying laptops, buying equipment, etc. So in a way, it's local employment generation through donation, through donor money in some circumstances. But this doesn't mean it doesn't create a good environment. It gives people hope in some circumstances that I've been trained and I have new skills and new knowledge. But in terms of economic activity, no, it does not create the right amount of economic activity most of the time. I'd rather these donors come in and create sorts of funds or VCs to invest in companies and make them more sustainable if this can happen.
Well, it seems like we're running out of time. Unfortunately, I wish we could add another hour of discussion with you. This is a really great conversation we have going, and I'm sorry to end it, but I'd like to ask each of you to end with a message or takeaway regarding resiliency or anything you think is important to end on.
I will just reiterate what I said, and maybe it's a message for a lot of the entrepreneurs, is that money is not the answer to everything. I know as a VC, we'd love to invest in companies. That's how we make our returns. We look for the best to invest in, but obviously, statistically, there isn't enough capital to go around for every entrepreneur, every startup, but that should not be something that deter a startup. I encourage every entrepreneur, every startup to find and explore dozens and dozens of ways to be resilient, to grow organically, even without capital, or if capital is delayed. I agree with Dr. Sargent. I see the glass, half full for sure, but people need to kind of know that, VCs and capital injections and all that is not really the only way to become successful. Don't lose hope for a lot of the entrepreneurs. Their resiliency, and be committed and stick the path. And whether money comes or doesn't, you can succeed.
Well said. I would like to just to make sure that that we get the message across that these are exciting times, and what we've seen in terms of histories, that some of the big companies or the companies that became game changers that were created out of adversity. And I expect that in years to come that we'll look back at 2020 and we'll see companies, global companies around the world, not just in certain regions, but around the world, that were formed in response to COVID-19. And so there are certain buckets that we know. We know that we will need food and clothing. And so we know we need healthcare. We know we need entertainment. We know that we need some type of activity. And so those things will still remain. And so how do you build a business around these core things, using technology, using AI, using automation and digitization? These things, these core industries will still be. And so I think that as we look at these challenges that are ahead of us, I think that for those who are playing the long game, note that the larger companies and those who are established right now, they won't always be here. There's something called, unfortunately, death. And so they'll transition at some point. And you're going to be handed the baton to run these companies, to run these industries, and to be a game changer. And so I would encourage you to get the skills now and to be optimistic. To be a good entrepreneur, you have to be forward looking. I've yet to meet an entrepreneur who is looking backwards. They may look backwards to learn from what has taken place, but they're looking forward, they're excited, they believe that they can be a game changer. Yes, not everyone is going to be successful, but you're going to learn enough skills that you can translate those skills into something else. And so I just want to encourage you that the future is bright, and just make use of it. Thank you.
My turn, yeah? Okay. I'll disagree with Winslow as I usually do. These are not exciting times whatsoever. Okay, these are the most uncertain times I think civilization have been through. Okay, normally when there's a war, it's between a few countries. It's localized. Even during World War I and II, it was still, there were lots of countries which were not affected. Okay, now we're all affected, and we don't know how long this will take. With all the technology around, with all the advances in sciences we've been through, we still do not have a cure and a vaccine 7-8 months down the line. Okay, so I think for business owners or for entrepreneurs, these are very challenging times. You really have to think that businesses have changed forever. Okay, working from home, working from your garden, studying from home has become a fact of life we all adapt to. Okay, so now you have to be, as Winslow said, you have opportunities within this new domain of business, okay? This new normal, as people have seen it. Now, GW October was always a place we go to, meet new people, have friends, shake hands, and create friendships, okay? Now, during businesses, I'm managing a business now, most of the people working online, there's no team spirit, okay? How can I create it on Zoom? It's not working, okay? But yes, I've just read a comment, it's exciting because of the uncertainty, but when the uncertainty extends beyond the normal, period of uncertainty, it becomes really challenging for business owners. It's easy to be a person who teaches, who does research, but when you manage a day-to-day business and there's this cash flow crunch you're going through every single day and every single end of week or end of month, survival is important, and then you just lose focus because it's too much stress. Okay. However, I am sure we will come out of this pandemic stronger. I don't know how, and I hope it happens very quickly, but I'm sure we're gonna create different types of businesses. We'll have better entrepreneurs, businesses with a purpose, and I want to underline the word purpose because it's very important. We've been through this Mickey Mouse type of business creation over the last 10 years. Okay, now it's time to have real businesses which really have adoption of the SDGs. They respect the environment, respect this planet where we all really ignored the planet over the last 100 years, and now this is where we are. We're in a pandemic because of what we've done. So I hope we have a better future, and I hope this is over soon. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Osman. Agreeing or disagreeing, I can think that we can all agree on one thing together, that Jamie, her first time moderating this exceptional session with very different views, have done a fantastic job on keeping us here. So let's give Jamie a big round of applause. Jamie, wonderful job, fantastic job. We are so proud of you. You've done this. So
thank you so much to our panelists, Dr. Sargent, Dr. Rofael, Mr. Osman. On behalf of myself and all of our attendees, it was a wonderful conversation, and you guys have such amazing things to share with us. So, and words of encouragement are always nice. So thank you for that, Dr. Sargent, and everyone else as well. And please come to our other sessions. We have one at 2. And thank you to all for this conversation.
Jamie, you can take it now. Big sigh of relief. You run a global conference from around the world here. You did fantastic. So
sigh of relief. I wasn't worried. Did I look nervous?
You did great. All right, everybody, we're going to end this session. Let's go to the 2 o'clock session. There's a lot of panelists are there, and we'll start the other session now. Great job, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy. Future is bright.